The Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee says it believes that a restrictive policy remains appropriate given the inflation risks. The central bank has lowered inflation expectations to average 4.9% this year from an earlier 5.1% forecast. It says it remains concerned about administered prices and it has marked up electricity inflation in its forecasts, even though other categories have gone down.
We are not targeting rates, we are targeting inflation. So if you want to know what's going to happen to rates, look at what is happening to the inflation outlook. Of course, the most recent prints are in the past, but the nature of inflation expectations in South Africa is such that it is very much driven by what the most recent inflation reading is. And we need to have continuous reading of inflation that shows a downward trajectory, but more importantly, that the expectations of the price setters becomes aligned with the midpoint of the inflation target range and with the forecast that the SARB has, which shows that inflation will not just decline to the midpoint, but in some of the quarters that it would dip below the midpoint.
4 members of the Monetary Policy Committee preferred to keep rates unchanged, while 2 wanted a cut of 25 basis points. FNB economist Koketso Mano says interest rates are expected to come down before the end of the year.
When we look at the market expectations, a lot of people are starting to predict that September will be that time when we start to see interest rates being cut. On our end, we think November is more likely. I think that put together, you can expect interest rates to be cut before the end of the year. I think that's the key takeaway. The reason we are a bit behind in terms of our expectations, or we see that interest rate cut being because the Fed is only broadly only expected to start cutting interest rates in September. So that the Reserve Bank will probably take cue from that and then only start to cut interest rates before the end of this year.
The Reserve Bank has lowered its economic growth forecast for the second quarter to 0.6% from an earlier 0.7% forecast on the back of recent weak mining and manufacturing production data. However, it expects better economic growth going forward, supported by a more reliable electricity supply and improving logistics. Gloria Sefako Musi, SABC News, Johannesburg.